Hello and welcome to episode number 5 of STA Extra. Today we have Joanna Hoddinott, who is a graduate sports therapist even from Hampshire, and she has recently come on board as STA regional rep in the southeast. It is southeast, isn't it? I should really know that as you coordinate. I should really know that. It is southeast, and I got it right. And today we're going to be talking about rehabilitation for clients with limited equipment and knowledge, something that I'm really passionate about and been looking forward to this. So, Joanna, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, kind of a little bit about your background, a little bit of an introduction, and then we'll get onto your presentation a bit.
No, thanks for having me on here. Are you okay to send to the first slide?
Yes, of course you can.
I'm Joanna. You can probably tell from the wrinkles and grey hair. This isn't my first career. So I had about 17 years in technical recruitment. I worked internationally, lived in Berlin and Barcelona as well for 3 or 4 years. Didn't really get the enjoyment out of my career that I was doing, so eventually came around to a career change and went back to university. So last summer I graduated amid the pandemic. I was working part-time as an assistant physiotherapist for the NHS in a local MSK clinic. So it took me a few months to kind of figure out what I was doing and what I was about. But my whole kind of career change journey has been very much shaped around my own injury history. So unlike some of the previous speakers, I'm not particularly athletic. I'm very passionate about strength and conditioning. I love hiking. I've been involved in motorsport. I've ridden horses. There's so many things I've done, road cycling, things like that. But it was actually my own injuries that has shaped this journey for me, because ultimately over the years I worked with lots of therapists in variety of different guises, and it was always about symptom management. And it was only when I started working with a personal trainer that I started to understand the benefits of exercise for keeping my back in particular nice and strong and pain-free. So fast forward a few years, I went to Chichester University. Post Chichester, I then went on to become a APPI certified clinical Pilates instructor, which was probably one of the best things I could have done, to be fair, post-qualification. And along the journey of becoming a graduate sports therapist, I also gained qualifications as a level 3 personal trainer, strength and conditioning coach, and gym instructor. So in September, I opened up a Hampshire-based clinic, so for Borden, in Borden for those who are local. And my client base is quite diverse. It's early days, but I seem to be developing a speciality with menopausal clients. So a lot of my clients are kind of mid-30s and above, and either perimenopausal, menopausal, or postmenopausal. I'm not sure if it's just my approach, but and my style of consulting, but I seem to attract an inordinately high number of very complex or unusual clients. But in the background, I'm also working and building relationships with local sports teams. So just before this last lockdown, I was about to take on a contract with a local rugby team. And I'm also in discussions with like local golf clubs, tennis clubs, basketball teams as well. So we're hopeful that will head in the right direction. My workload is typically injury prevention, injury rehabilitation, but courtesy of the various different sports and instruction qualifications I've got, I do a lot of my work around exercise as well. So exercise classes. So that might be clinical Pilates, it could be strength and conditioning, or even mobility classes. But I must admit, I have a very strong bias towards exercise therapy over manual therapy and soft tissue work. I will use it, but predominantly I look to exercise therapy to kind of work with a lot of my clients. That might change as I go, but it's working really well so far.
At least you save your hands.
Yeah,
You're not going to be one of those therapists whose thumbs are knackered by after 10 years. I've got a question from this bit, because it's out of personal, intrigue, but I imagine there's some people listening or watching who also have similar sort of questions. So here you've got level 2 gym instructor, level 3 personal trainer, and level 2 S&C coach. So on paper to the layperson probably sound quite similar things. What's the different learning? What was the different kind of points from each of those that you kind of picked up? And this comes from a kind of personal journey that I'm looking at just doing something different as well, personally.
So the level, to be honest, is when I did the level 2 gym instructor and level 3 personal trainer, it was a combined qualification. So you went in and worked your way through it over the course of, it was like a weekend. It was either, I think it was every other weekend for several months. But the one thing I learned from that is choose your professional or your education advisors or providers very carefully, because I think that the quality of instruction I received was not necessarily commensurate with the price. So it's been a learning curve for me. But ultimately, the level 2 gym instructor and level 3 personal training qualification just takes you through the basics of, mostly for the instructor working within a gym context, but to run classes. So there would be everything from health and safety to anatomy to nutrition. And then the level 3 personal trainer in theory kind of equips you for working one-to-one with clients and perhaps going more towards the strength and conditioning context. It depends on interests. The level 2 strength and conditioning coach comes off the back of the fact that I've been quite a passionate coastal rower, and I was very interested when I first started university in specialising in working with rowers particularly. So this was a qualification that came via British Rowing, but interestingly it was sponsored by a rugby type qualification or rugby sponsor, and that was great because I got to go up to the kind of, that was a really big centre. I can't remember what it was called off the top of my head, but it's outside of Reading. It's on the Thames, and I think it's like a centre for like the English hockey teams and some of the English rugby teams, for example, the national teams. So it was very much the principles of strength and conditioning. So I am very much a lightweight in strength and conditioning, but my plan was, this was a starting or a stepping stone on the way to maybe exploring more formalised strength and conditioning qualifications. So it was more of a taster to give you an idea of what's out there.
Yeah, no, it just came from like personal intrigue really, and I imagine there's probably quite a few people going, do I do an S&C or do I do personal training? Which do I do?
Yeah,
you know, because they're not cheap courses to do.
No.
And like, I think you hit the nail on the head there. Choose your educators wisely.
Yeah, I wanted to just to put out on top of that, I wouldn't have gone and done the S&C qualification now. I wouldn't do it without having the personal training and gym instructor qualification, because there were people within the course that I did that S&C qualification with who were really quite out of their depth in terms of the knowledge. So they were rowing coaches that wanted to do a little bit more. So it did help that I had both the degree knowledge that I was working through, but also I got more out of it that way.
Yeah, I suppose it depends on your background, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And kind of like what kind of level you trained at. And so, right, let's go into the main crux of everything. So, next slide on your presentation.
So I guess that's how I work. So I think my previous career has really shaped the way I'm working with clients. I was listening to the Matt's, I have it as the podcast version, but the Tuesday evening chat with Matt.
Yeah.
There was a podiatrist on there the other week, and I was listening to that recently because he kind of verbalized the way that I work, I think, quite nicely. So I see myself as someone came up on the podcast and said, you're an injury detective, and the injury is the scene of the crime. So I learned quite early on in my degree that the subjective interview is the kind of the absolute foundation of what we do. So I have taken it to quite a different level. So often, and when I'm doing all of my initial consults now are for an hour. And for most of that, it is just about history taking. It's about all those little clues that kind of present as part of my clients' kind of tapestry of their life. Because what I started to notice quite early on is clients will come to you and they've got an injury, say they've got a problem with their hip, but then they go backwards, and the more you go back in time, the more you see this kind of like this trail of clues that really helps. And what it's given me is the opportunity that, particularly with clients that have perhaps exhausted their avenues with perhaps the NHS through just sheer frustration, they come to me, and what I'm tending to see is that because of the limited resources the NHS has in terms of kind of spending time talking to clients, they're missing out on quite major clues. So what I really do is I like to take the time, and I'm kind of not ashamed of that at all. I will spend a good hour talking with my clients. And then that then gives me a foundation that where I do assessments or follow-ups, like tests, etc., it's really to prove the theory that I'm developing or to rule it out. So working in a virtual context is forcing me to be really creative. So at the moment, it varies from client to client, but I've been experimenting with getting clients recording themselves doing different activities. So, for example, I'm quite partial at the moment to a quantitative assessment of a single leg squat. So I've got my little kind of framework, I get them to film it. And then the great thing is that as I'm going through it, I can do it in slow motion. So with my experience levels being lower, I can't just look at someone necessarily and say, oh, that's out. But if I take it to slow motion, I can then, like, it gives my brain chance to catch up. But also, there's some great stuff out there around things like hip mobility assessments, stalk tests. That's been brilliant, actually, stalk tests. Just getting them to pre-record kind of doing their range of movement exercises. I've been dabbling with a version of the limb symmetry index. So where I've substituted a handheld dynamometer to get an output from a particular muscle movement or joint movement. I've been using home weighing scales. Now, before people get very scandalized about the fact that I'm using kind of like bathroom scales, I'm very aware that there are issues around kind of compensatory techniques and variability. So I'm using it as a guide, but I'm not using that information religiously. So it's just to help shape an overall picture. But the thought process is that if I get the clients to kind of repeat the same technique a month apart or 2 months apart, in theory, if everything's heading in the right direction, we should see improvements. And certainly for things like the single leg squat and squat assessments and the stalk tests, it's a really nice, easy way to measure it. Also things like just outcome measures. So using some of the things as the IHOT and stuff like that, particularly for some of my more complex pain clients that are really heavily down that persistent pain route, using those kind of quality of life measures is a really nice way to kind of review that. Plus just doing things like getting their partners to film them doing kind of like walking and running. Yes, it's on an uneven surface, but I'm trying to be really creative with the way I'm assessing clients to give me as much background data. I am somewhat or very suspicious of a lot of what we deem as special tests. I think that the physio tutors, the German duo that are in, I think they're in the Netherlands, when you look at and that came quite early on in my university career, when you look at their results for like sensitivity and specificity and like reliability, I was always questioning why we were using those. So yes, I appreciate that there are some things we can't substitute for, but it's right now within this virtual context, I'm doing the best I can, but I'm very, very careful and cautious. So I'm always talking to my clients.
Yeah, I think with kind of special tests, if you're going to use them, you have to kind of know what you're doing with them, I suppose, to a certain degree. And you're right, the specificity and kind of sensitivity of them is questionable. And that's if we're doing them. If we're getting somebody to do it at home, that's just going to drop ridiculously. I just want to go back to that little bit there that you said about scales. People might kind of go, oh, what are you doing that for? I think it's really useful. I've used it myself for kind of like single leg squat stuff. So like as a visual aid on how slow to do things, on how much increased, ground force is going through the limb as they move. Because it's a visual representation. If they control it, it doesn't go as high, doesn't go it doesn't shoot and come back down. And I think things like that, using things around the house like that, are absolutely valuable.
Yeah.
I think it's great.
Yeah. Well, I in the end, I created a little kind of like, I just got very busy one evening, took loads of photos with me in different positions using my own scales. And then I've created like a little table so that the clients know how to replicate the positions. You know, I'm very aware that people use compensatory patterns. So, you know, I take those results with caution, but it can often kind of highlight some quite startling contrasts in terms of power from side to side, or
massively.
output from side to side. And I picked it up from a physio, one of my team lead when I was working in the NHS. You walked in one day with a client and got them rolling, or their patient rolling around the floor doing exactly the same thing. And I'd never come across this before. And at the time I was a bit suspicious, but now I'm like, well, actually, I'm having to be as creative as possible to ensure that I'm helping my clients. So yeah, it's maybe a few years down the line, I'll look back at this and laugh and say how foolish I was. But right now it's giving, you know, the combination of all the different things I'm doing, it's giving me some really useful metrics that we can then, as we're progressing, we can measure. You know, you've got a real clear measure with my clients in terms of how they're progressing. So far, it's all kind of gone really well. But again, I don't just do a rehab session and spin the clients off. I'm really careful. I'm maintaining a lot of contact with my clients, which actually spins me on to the next point, because as I mentioned earlier, I'm very much kind of biased towards exercise therapy. It's been a bit of a kind of a journey of discovery, which I think is fair to say for any fresh new clinic. But originally I was going down the route of just doing one-to-one injury rehab, but I had quite a high drop-off rate because I think a lot of clients expect that quick fix. So they want to have the pain go away. They want, you know, like they talk about kind of like the clunks of the chiropractors, etc., for the you know, the manipulations. So I won't let clients sign in with me or on with me until we've had a conversation. So I'm very, very clear about how I work so that there's no confusion there. So that does help a lot. But what I found quite early on is that particularly, you know, it's easy with clients who are very motivated and they already do a lot of sport. But for the clients that, and I get a lot of the clients who don't have a history in exercise, so they very quickly lost their way, because when I'm introducing a concept of, yeah, you have to kind of exercise 3-4 times a week in order to strengthen, and that just doing it intermittently isn't going to work, they really kind of like dropped off quite quickly. So in parallel to my injury rehab, when I first started, I was running exercise classes, just the Pilates, the strengthening classes, the mobility classes. But where I've had the most success is in January, I actually opened up and introduced what I call an unlimited class pass. So the concept behind that is it's only offered to my injury prevention, my injury rehab clients who are paying for that support. But, and again, it's individual specific, it's condition specific. But what I found works really well in terms of their adherence and uptake is actually, I just plug them into the class pass and I'm seeing them almost daily in a lot of cases. So I can keep an eye on their injury progress and their rehabilitation progress. But it also gives me the chance to just gradually filter in information that is going to really help them, whilst also creating a community, of a really supportive community, where if I have to leave the room while I'm setting up, they'll all be nattering away amongst themselves, and whether it could be just they're talking politics or weather, but they could also be talking about their own shared experiences of what's working for them, where they're coming from. And as a result, now I've got probably, I think off the top of my head, about 20 clients who are now doing these monthly class passes with me, and they come back. It's not a long-term thing, but what I'm getting now is we're making some amazing progress that we weren't necessarily making at the beginning in September when I was just doing one-to-one. So it's going to evolve, it's going to change, but for me, I feel like I've kind of lucked onto a winner here in terms of getting people kind of coming in for a variety of different exercises on a regular basis. And then at the end of it, the idea is that once they've completed their injury rehab journey, they then might still stay with me just to do maybe a Pilates class once a week because they just want to exercise.
That's really interesting, because it's expanding, isn't it, about outside of, you know, some therapists kind of, right, I don't want people to carry on coming and see me. I've actually got a couple of clients like over the past like year and a bit who still contact me now for like fitness stuff. You know, it's the rugby players or footballers or something, and they want something a bit extra. It's outside of the injury world. They want some mobility stuff. They want some specific strength and conditioning. And that is well within the remit of a graduate sports therapist or sport, you know, people with sports therapy diplomas, people who've done exercise prescription things. And we need to sometimes get away from, they don't have to be injured. You know, it's sometimes about injury prevention.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really interesting kind of little subtopic there. I think that could be something else we could talk about at another time, to be honest.
Well, for me, part of the reason I went down the exercise route as well is that when I was trying to figure out what I was going to do when I was growing up, so to speak, so this is over the last 3 years, a lot of people saying, well, just start massaging. And and maybe this is my kind of commercial experience coming in, but I was thinking, well, massaging is going to knacker out my hands and I'm getting older. So I've already got a bit of arthritis in places I don't want arthritis. So, and I was thinking, well, if I massage, I have the opportunity to influence one person. Whereas if that maybe influence is not the right word, but I have an opportunity to interact with one person. If I run an exercise class, then I have the opportunity to interact with maybe up to 10 people. And then that's a sustainable income regularly, week in, week out, regardless of what my clinic work is doing. Now, don't get me wrong, ultimately, I want to have probably 90% of my work is one-to-one rehab. So I'm looking at apprenticeship schemes at the moment to kind of train up people who can run my classes in the future. But for me, it made far more kind of financial sense for me to kind of access a broader pool of people, but keep a steady income trickling in. And that's really kind of come into fruition these last lockdowns, because it's not been easy. I've been working my backside off because I'm running kind of anywhere between 4 and 6 sessions a day for different classes. But in some ways, it's been a bit of a savior for me with my mental health and having daily contact with people. But it's meant that I've been able to meet the overheads of my clinics when perhaps the injury rehab clients were lower. But also for me as well is that having taught exercise classes all the way through my degree, what I noticed is that by running and seeing people week in, week out, they come to trust you, they learn how you work. And not that I'm injuring people in my classes, but invariably, particularly as you get older, you carry a whole history of injury in your body. And as they start to trust you, they'll then start talking about it. So in January, I had quite a few clients coming to me who've been long-term class goers of mine. And they're saying, do you think you could take a look at my back now, or my hip now that you're qualified and now that you're up and running? And it's been great because, you know, they dip in, get the rehab or prevention work that they need from me, and then they just dip back out again and go into their classes. So it for me, it made a lot of sense, and it's really borne up the results so far.
It's really interesting because it's just a different side of the business that affects the other side of the business, and it just goes hand in hand, doesn't it?
Yeah.
No. So next bit. So supporting clients new to exercise.
Yeah. So that comes back down to my own history as well. So I'm, especially being a student, I had no money whatsoever for the last years, but I've moved around a lot. So I didn't really want to, over the years when I was living in Germany and Spain, I was also traveling a lot for business as well. So I'd live in whole different countries part-time. So I'd be living in, say, Berlin, and then I'd be spending all week working out of Sweden. So I needed to find, even when I wasn't qualified and I was just had my own kind of personal trainer that was, you know, working with me and supporting me, we had to get really creative, because it was not just a case of I could go to the local gym, or I wouldn't necessarily have enough room to kind of carry a full set of sports clothes, etc. So very early on, I learned about the joys of resistance bands, and there's so much you can do with resistance bands. And
I hate the people who slag off resistance bands.
Yeah,
they get bad mouthed, so you can't do X, Y, and Z. You can't get enough resistance. You can't build muscle. You can't build strength. You just need to know how to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's fine if you're kind of like a I don't know, doing some like power, work or
Oh
something.
yeah, that's
But
for
even
general
though,
fitness.
yeah,
Yeah,
but even those who do the power work, so I follow quite a lot of people on, for example, Instagram, they even use the resistance bands themselves. They just use it smartly to come, in tandem with everything else that they're using.
yeah.
But for me, resistance bands were great because they get squashed down into a little bag and be put in a drawer, but they're lightweight, and there's a huge amount of flexibility because you've got the different scales to them. So, but one of the things that I particularly started championing when I was newly qualified as a personal trainer is that, I am a typical kind of, I'll be 43 in April, so I'm a middle-aged woman, overweight, not at that time I wasn't particularly fit and strong. I didn't have a clue what I was doing. I used to try gyms over the years, and I blooming hated them because I felt like I felt, what's the phrase, a fish out of water or whatever, but it was just not my place to be. And it was only when I started to educate myself and do the degree and like really improve my knowledge that I went from absolutely loathing the gym to suddenly it was this giant playground where I just treated myself like a giant experiment. And then when I was going through the degree, when I had my injuries, everything that I was learning on the degree from an exercise therapy perspective, or like on my own research, and for the people I follow on Instagram, for example, I was putting that into effect in the gym. But because I'm not affiliated with a gym at the moment, to the point where I can access their facilities for free. And it was really important for me to be able to create a safe environment for a lot of my clients. So if we go back to the fact that a lot of my clients are middle-aged and older women, they don't feel comfortable. They don't feel like they belong in a gym, in that kind of environment. They don't know where to start. I've even had women or female clients who've called me up before they're about to start an exercise program or like a class with me, and they will actually be shouting down the phone because they're so terrified of what that class might make them do. So I wanted to create something that was financially viable, i.e. they didn't have to go and spend lots of money on lots of equipment, whether that was like the latest workout gear or weights, etc., but also to make it kind of accessible to everybody. So, I'm not, if someone wants to come to me and they want to go into some sort of, I don't know, like bikini modeling competition, or, like they're really into their hardcore strength and conditioning, I'm not that person. I'm more the gateway into that. So my greatest joy is working with people that are completely new to exercise, are quite frankly scared clueless of it. Sorry, I won't swear. Really, I swear like a trooper. They've never done it before, but they want to try, because I think everybody has the right to have access to this. And I don't want anyone to come away feeling that they're being judged or they don't belong somewhere. So that was where I've kind of really set myself up. So for me, going beyond the basics of things like restoring pain-free movement, looking at the benefits of stress management, using my group classes to create this like amazing community of men and women. And I've got, like 19-year-olds all the way up to 18-year-olds, men and women in the same class. So what I'm trying to do is create this gateway to allow people to start exercising, to drip feed in education. And, for me, with these people, half the time, you can go to the high level athlete, or like the weekend warriors, as I think they call them. But, for the most part, any movement is better than no movement.
Precisely.
And so for me, a lot of the stuff that I'm doing is around how can we just get people moving. So that might be that with my classes, I run daily 30-minute mobility sessions, and whether my client has a current injury that I'm rehabbing, or whether it's someone who's just like a little 70-year-old that just feels really stiff and is hurting, then just doing some daily movements and guided mobility. It doesn't have to be like these advanced levels of mobility flows. It can just be playing around with different styles and techniques for doing it, for example, glute max stretch. So for example, if you think about with a glute max stretch, you'll lie on your back, you'll cross your knee, and then you'll pull it towards you. I've discovered now that you can just do it lying on your back. You put your feet on the sofa and you can get an even deeper stretch by doing it that way. Because a lot of my clients don't have the capacity to do something simple as just reaching down and grabbing their calf to do a quad stretch. So I'm constantly having to try and find ways to account for people's I don't want to say insufficiencies, because that's the wrong word, but bearing in mind my clients are not a young population often, or they've got an injury, I'm always having to adapt. So it's just trying to find and experiment with different positions. So just without any equipment, it's just how can we use our body more effectively. And then we make it fun. I'm chatting away to my clients, we're getting them interacting with one another, so then that takes some of the fear away from it. I also place a big emphasis on stress management as well. So a lot of my clients at the moment are massively struggling with like social isolation. So for me, it's really important. I started offering in my local community, to join in on my mobility classes, just so that they could have some interactions with people. Because for me, it doesn't have to be these really elite exercise programs. It can just be the chance for them, even they just roll around on the floor and have a little giggle along with everybody else. That's just as important. But I'll also then thinking about, well, what equipment do we have available? So it might be that if we don't have resistance bands, or if we don't have dumbbells, do we have a pair of old tights or a pair of leggings? That was something I heard recently. Had they got a book that they could stick in a rucksack? Have they got dressing gown or belts to help them get into position for, say, like a quad stretch? We play around with using, instead of doing more traditional sets and reps, we might play around with, say, doing, like just timing it. It might be that we use pieces of furniture. So instead of them, because a lot of my clients can't do push-ups, so we might turn around and say, well, can we do a push-up against the wall? Can we do it against the windowsill? We focus on maybe eccentric face work. We work on instability or stability. So most of my classes now have some form of kind of proprioception work and stability work. So I might have them doing, say, a shoulder bridge. I might do it more kind of like the traditional Pilates style where you roll up, or I might do it more as a hip thrust. Can I get them lying on the side of their bed or with their feet up on the sofa? Can I have them whack a pillow under their feet to create instability? So it's using those sorts of things. I've even got them using like a bag of potatoes. I've even got them, if someone's complaining of a really tight muscle, I might, if they haven't got a tennis ball, I might even get them to use an apple just to roll on, as long as it's not on.
I'll be honest, I've never heard that one before.
I found potatoes.
Never heard that one before. No.
I will use anything that I can in the house.
Oh yeah, no, that's the side of it I love. I've had, well, I can't do that because I haven't got their equipment. Oh, I can get you exercising. Have you got a towel in your house? Yes, you do.
Yeah.
So I get people doing isometric deadlifts,
yes,
isometric bicep curls, rows with a towel.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, an isometric contraction only trains that one range.
Mm-hmm.
Take a step back, move into the next range. You slowly come up. When you're doing a bicep curl, you can work through the ranges. Hold it. I'm really sad I've got some equipment. I get all sorts of stuff. I've got things like these, which are just ratchet straps, which people use to tie things down on cars. These have got such a tensile strength.
Oh, nice.
And they're massive. So you can get people kind of doing a squat movement and just holding a squat movement and push again, stand on that, pull up.
Yeah.
If people haven't got that, towels are perfect. Like I've said, I found a luggage strap ages ago. It's just a clip-on luggage strap. I use that. You can do resisted shoulder exercise. You can do all sorts. One of the best ones I've done is bags for life from the supermarket.
Mm-hmm.
Double bag them just in case.
Yeah.
And just pile it with stuff.
Yes.
And you can use it as a kettlebell.
Yes.
I actually used my daughter when it was last year, so she was 3. So I actually had my 3-year-old daughter in it, doing kettlebell swings.
Yeah. Well,
I don't advocate that for everybody. She loved it. She did consent to it.
you got to be careful. I mean, I jokingly said, because quite often pets feature in my workout, so my clients have lots of different pets. So I was jokingly asking them how much their dogs weighed, because they were casting around for something to put across their hips in a hip thrust, and I'm like, well, if the dog will allow it, just drape the dog or the child across your pelvis, so you've got some resistance there. So it's just trying to make it accessible, and yes, you can go down to kind of like that minutiae of detail about specific exercises, but like I said earlier, most people for the most part just need to move, because they're not moving.
I think a lot of it is a dip within a rehab setting, and like especially for kind of populations like you said, they won't have stuff.
No.
If you give them a lot of exercise to do, right, I want you to do this squat with this amount of weight and this, they haven't got the stuff. They're not going to go to a gym. If you want to increase adherence, you need to give them stuff that they can do in a comfortable environment and safely, in my opinion, which is why I like resistance bands. Because if it's too much resistance, you leave go and it's just a band. If I try to get somebody who's never squatted lifting 40, 50 kilos into a front squat position, and they're not comfortable with that, me or them could get hurt. You know, that's not going to inspire confidence. That's not going to increase the adherence. And using these, in your words, these gateway techniques, I think are fantastic.
It's working, and for me it's really important as well, because I'd hate the thought of inadvertently injuring anyone. So I'm whether it's age or lack of experience, but I am more cautious. So I'm very, very careful. I like to make sure that my clients have got the foundations before I ask anything more of them. So even within the classes, I keep my classes quite small. So typically there'd be maybe somewhere between 4 and 8 people, but I won't have any more than 10 in there, because every time I do an exercise, I'm not an exercise instructor. People go, you must be so fit doing 4 to 6 classes a day, and I'm kind of silently laughing, because it's like, I'm reasonably strong and fit, but I demonstrate, and then the rest of the time, particularly with my virtual stuff, I've got my face pressed up against the screen, and I'm giving individual feedback for each exercise to each client, so that they are then getting that guidance. And that would be the same as well for the one-to-one rehab. So when you're trying to kind of demonstrate kind of like scapular retraction, protraction, etc., I said to you earlier, I've even been known to get someone, if they're struggling to kind of separate out a scapular movement from an elbow movement, I've even got them to kind of like strap a wooden spoon or wooden spoons around their elbows so that they can't bend their elbows, because sometimes people need that physical kind of cueing. And you know what, it's not perfect doing virtual, so I guess this talk today is very much kind of like a virtual context at the moment, but I tell you what, there is so much you can pick up on with cues, and even just using body parts. So for example, if you've got someone doing a clam, it's so easy for them to get the right or the wrong technique. So I use things like, I get them to put their hand on their hip, so their elbow's up in the air, and just from seeing the way the elbow is moving, you can see whether they got the technique right or not. And I also look at the clothes that they're wearing. So for example, one of the key drivers of clinical Pilates is about something called movement dissociation. So if I'm getting them to do shoulder flexion and they're lifting up, if I see their t-shirt lifting up and exposing their abdomen, then I know that they're not keeping a really good position there from a Pilates perspective. So I use clothes as much for a cue in terms of their technique as anything else.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Going back to that cueing thing there, it's something that just popped into my head. On the scapular retraction, I had a client over a year ago, and she struggled. She could, no matter how much, we could not get her to retract her scapulars. She had quite a lot of anterior shoulder pain from walking dogs. And I went away, did a bit of research, and I found one bit of research, I'll have to post it after this, on using metronome. So rather than visual cueing, you get them to listen to the clicks. I think I might have actually mentioned this in one of my other talks. And you get them to do the movement with the click. So they concentrate on the click. So then the movement kind of becomes a subconscious secondary thought, and within a week, she went from, it was about 3 weeks of frustration to 1 week of, I can do it.
And best thing in the world. When that light comes on in their head and they make the connection. So for example, I had a client who, particularly through the mobility work we've been doing in the daily sessions, she's now gone from not being able to do a lot of what we first started, and now she can do it with ease. And there's so much joy to what she does now because she's regaining confidence. She said to me, I can now, something stupid, from her perspective, but it's for me, I get goosebumps when I think about it. And she said, I can now change the bed and I don't need to do painkillers or take painkillers to do it. But one of the things I realized quite early on when I was doing the personal training, and it's become even more obvious now, is that when you are rehabbing, you've got to very quickly get into the head of, and teaching classes as well, but you've got to very quickly get into the head of the client and understand their learning style. So some people, I can just talk at them and they can follow those instructions without me needing to demonstrate. Some physically need me to demonstrate it for them, to show them. Some need me to put their limbs into place. And some, because there's so many different styles of learning. And just like for us, when we're trying to absorb information, it's the same for my clients. And I've got some clients as well that I don't know how to describe it, but no matter how many times they're doing exercise, they have very little body awareness. So sometimes it's a case of you've got to kind of tap into their brain and get them just to visually or mentally slow down, and kind of you have to work quite closely with them to do everything. So it's not just about equipment, but it's like, for example, the cues you're using. So some of my clients were joking that mine are always food orientated. It's probably why I'm overweight. But like for example, with shoulder position, I explain the mechanics of the shoulder, but then we talk about the fact that with the shoulder blades, you imagine that they're blocks of chocolate or blocks of ice, and they're melting and they're sliding down the back. And it's those cues that really do seem to make a difference.
That's interesting. God, we could talk hours, I think, just on cues as well. So one-to-one rehab bit, last little bit on here.
So I think for the most part, we've probably covered it off, but what I'm learning quite well at the moment is that I often end up splitting it into 2 stages, and I'm sure this will change again, but first stage is they'll pay for say 50 or 60 minutes with me. First stage is we'll do a debrief, update, progress, etc. Then I might send them away to do some videos for me of various different assessments that I might want to use or do. I'll then review them, follow up with some homework, and then that seems to be working quite well, because then I can use the rest of the slot to check their technique. But also then I'm adding in, which I found worked really well, is that particularly for technique and adherence, just adding in some shorter sessions. So like just getting them to have like a 20-minute session with me to check in. And that's working quite nicely, because sometimes clients don't need a full 50 minutes or a full hour. So having a much shorter, how's it all going? Any problems with the exercise I've taught you or shown you, then we can just double check on them. But for the most part, for me, it is the classes and having these daily interactions with them that are really, really making the difference for me. So it's well, kind of from the clinic financial perspective, but also from the client's well-being as well.
It's interesting stuff. So that's kind of end of presentation stuff. It's been an interesting discussion. I think me and you could probably talk for hours on this. If anybody wants to kind of know a little bit more about how you work, I think there's some interesting discussion points on there, especially kind of like how you've married both in together. I put a little bit of contact information on the screen there with your website, your email, and your Facebook. Is there anywhere else, or what's your preferred contact method?
To be honest, any of those. I'm also on Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn as well, but if you go to the website, there's all my social media details there. I am on Twitter, but I don't really do it. I never did wrap my head around that. But there's contact forms on the website. I try to respond to all messages as quickly as possible. So, and then I think my telephone number's on the presentation as well. So if people want to send me a message or give me a call. I love chatting. I love collaborating. So if there's opportunities that people are really interested in chatting to me about, then I'm really happy to do that.
And also, you are a regional rep, and they can contact you and Emma, and STA members in the Southeast. If you're a member, there's links in the members group on this. If not, contact myself. I've got all the links to all the reps, all the contact information for all the reps and all the groups. If anybody wants to find out any more about anything we do within the Sports Therapy Association, we are available on various Facebook pages, including the one that is shown on screen. So that's our main page. We are on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and our newly vamped website, which is just undergoing a bit of a facelift at the moment. Don't forget as well, every Tuesday, 8 o'clock, and rerun on Spotify, all podcasts. You can catch Matt Phillips with various guests, very interesting talks on there. And something new we are talking about at the moment is our Wednesday morning coffee chats, literally half an hour. Drop in, have a chat with me, different members of the STA, about anything you would like to talk about. We are here just to listen. And at the end of every month, we're going to do a research review club where somebody will choose a piece of research, maybe that they are interested in, want to read. We can go away as a group, read, review, discuss it. And when we come back and discuss it, those who do come back will get a nice little certificate from myself. And that counts towards your CPD. If anybody wants to contact me about anything else, you can do so, Scott at the STA. So anything regarding regionals, reps, any of the talks that we do here, anything else, contact me at Scott at the STA. Joanna, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you. It's been brilliant.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much. Cheers, guys.